Eminent domain refers to the power of the state to seize private property for public use with monetary compensation. In 2006, Governor Blunt signed a bill prohibiting the use of eminent domain solely for economic development purposes. However, critics argue that economic development benefits the public. What do you think the solution to those arguments are?
Well, I played a major role in the piece of legislation that was passed in 2006. It was handed back and forth between various legislators as it went through the process, but I negotiated the final settlement on that in probably April of that year. What we did, I think, was an appropriate compromise between the two extremes. And again, what we do in Jefferson City when we're doing our job right is to take the extremes of both sides and to try and find a common solution in the middle that makes sense for people. What we did was we recognized that people were having to give up their homes, as was occurring, for example, in Sunset Village and Sunset Hills in St. Louis. And they were basically being scared out of their homes at bargain basement prices. And you know, an individual, a senior citizen who may have lived in a home for 50 years, maybe a widow or a widower, was getting 90 cents on the dollar for his or her home and could nowhere go find additional housing anywhere commensurate with the style that they have lived in. So what we did in the General Assembly was, for the first time, make developers pay a real premium for any governmental taking. 125% of fair market value on most homes, up to 150%, which recognizes that while sometimes eminent domain is necessary, it should always be painful for the developer who is moving into an area. And to the greatest extent possible, we should limit private developers, whenever possible, from moving into, from utilizing the eminent domain power when it affects people's homes and lives.
Senator Gibbons.
Kevin, would you restate that question for me just briefly?
Yeah, basically I asked, after Governor Blunt signed a bill prohibiting the use of eminent domain solely for economic development purposes, critics started to argue that economic development benefits the public.
This is an example where Senator Koster and I worked very closely together on this legislation. And here's where the line has to be drawn. We're talking about people's homes, their businesses, and in our country, it's, I mean, the Declaration of Independence nearly said life, liberty, and property. I mean, it's a very fundamental aspect of our entire society. And what happened in Sunset Hills, that particular development, was in my legislative district, and it was an absolute abuse of the power of government to move retail shoppers from one shopping center to another. And so in that instance, not only was there was no real common good or uplifting that was going to happen from that development, but also it lasted so long, people didn't know what to do with their homes. They didn't know if they were going to be bought out, if it was going to happen, if it was going to fail. They didn't put roofs on, they didn't fix it, they didn't know what to do. And it just was an absolute gross abuse of the citizenry, and that just shouldn't happen. And if that's at the expense of somebody's financial interest, then so be it. Typically, what eminent domain is used for in those circumstances is to take a project that otherwise would not be financially successful to the developer and give them a margin of profit. The driving focus isn't how we're going to benefit people and make an area better. It is how is this project going to be financially successful for the investors. And I think when that's the equation, I side with the property owner.
Okay, the next question comes from Mark Welsh and goes first to Senator Gibbons.
A large part of the Attorney General's job is to protect consumers. How would you work to stop con artists before they target Missourians in financial schemes?
It's a very good question. It goes to the root of what I think these offices are really about. You don't really, I mean, ideally, you never want to have to get to the part where you're prosecuting someone. That means somebody's been hurt. And so you want to try to deal with it as early as possible. I think it's a twofold process. First of all, we have a good consumer protection law in this state. We have a strong Merchandising Practices Act. And I would say that that's something, you know, to your other Attorney General Nixon has done a pretty good job with. So you have to be aggressive and effective in the enforcement and be very clear what you're doing and be public about it. People need to know that are thinking about cheating people or being con artists in this state, that there are serious ramifications, and this sort of effort is not going to be ignored. The second thing is to be very aggressive in the minute that you become aware that some sort of scam is going on, because they tend to come in a flurry. Something will be tried, and then eventually it runs out of steam, and some other effort will come through. Well, that's to publicize that, to let people know. I'd like to have a couple things, a fraud hotline in the Attorney General's office, but also people that could sign up on an email list so that if there is a fraud or a scam or a con that's happening in the state of Missouri, that the Attorney General's office, at really no cost, can send out an email message to everybody on that list to say, this is an alert. If you get a notice that looks like it's from your bank, delete it and or forward it to us, and then delete it and call us because it's false and they're trying to get your information.
Senator Koster.
I think Attorney General Nixon has done a pretty good job in this regard. There is the 800 number where consumer complaints can come into, and information then is appropriately distributed either inside the AG's office or over to the Department of Insurance. My hope is that the next Department of Insurance will be more aggressive in working through these issues. We are just now in the process of coming through the unraveling of the subprime mess. We've had legislation in the General Assembly on that. My belief is that the Department of Insurance could have and should have gone farther in putting together a list of policies and regulations that more closely monitored the area. There has been and continues to be important multi-district litigation that is going on within the Attorney General's community across the country. For example, Countrywide Mortgage just had to pay a $340 million fine from litigation that Attorney General Tom Miller in Iowa had led. But there is an entire level of subprime lending that has yet to be examined for fraud. A lot of that having occurred inside minority communities or underprivileged communities. And the next Attorney General needs to start by opening up that hood and looking there.